next guest is Dr. Bridge Bomby with the Centric Health Hour sponsored segment here on The Richard Bean Show. We've been talking to Dr. Bomby since this pandemic broke, and he brings us some degree of sobriety to look at these issues that we're dealing with, which unfortunately has now become a political issue as well as a medical or a scientific issue here. We're going to be talking to Dr. Bomby about some of the controversy over vaccines and how quickly, once a vaccine is developed, we may get it. How long does it take to roll out a vaccine to a country of 330 million people, and what percentage of, Dr. Bomby has been on before and said up to 50% of Americans are leery of taking the vaccine. So we could be in a situation, we have a nation of cynics here, a nation of skeptics, where we could have a rock solid vaccine and only half the people take it. And what the hell would that do? I want to welcome Dr. Bridge Bomby of Centric Health, and he's a local cardiologist in town. Dr. Bridge Bomby, how are you, sir?
Richard, I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing great. How's your weekend look, sir? Are you leaving town, or are you sticking around?
Yeah. Sticking around, enjoying the beautiful air.
Beautiful. That's right. Hey, Dr. Bomby, I got to start because it's been one of the top lead news stories of the week, the dispute between President Trump and the head of the CDC over what a rollout of this vaccine might look like, and practically how long does it take, where do you start, and how long does it really take to vaccinate an entire country of our size? My first question would be, we were talking about this the other day, and we're not medical experts. Number one, has this been done before? Has the entire country ever gone through a mass vaccination? The only thing I could think of would be for polio back in the 50s. But are you aware, have we done this before? Do we have any experience with this?
The current experiment is totally novel. Because in 1976, when there was a threat of swine pandemic, and the situation was eerily similar at the time, President Ford was running for re-election, and there was a concern about politicization of the vaccination. And they developed a vaccine. As we mentioned before, President Ford himself took the vaccine. But at the end of the day, the pandemic never panned out, thankfully petered out. But people were vaccinated, and we had 54 cases or so of Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a very bad disease to have, and that was a result of vaccination. So the concern with vaccination always remains, is it thoroughly vetted? And the vetting obviously is about efficacy and safety. Both those components demand dimension of time. That cannot be squeezed. All the processes that go into developing, using the technologies to develop a vaccine have been used with an amazing speed and accuracy. But the third phase is where the rubber hits the road, and it's going to take its time. So let's say you have a vaccine that appears to have approximate potential that it's going to have 80 or 90% prevention of infection. But it doesn't have the benefit of it being time-tested, that nothing bad will happen for 6 months or a year. So that's where the problem is. Even if you have a vaccine that looks very promising to begin with, it only looks promising to begin with. For it to stay promising, it has to be tested over time, and you cannot hurry time. That's the challenge.
When you say you can't, when stage 3 are these widespread trials that we're in now with a couple of these vaccines, at least I think 1 or 2 of them. Now, when you come out of, when you declare the vaccine ready, I'm assuming that it's not going to be effective on 100% of the people. What percentage on a good vaccine, what percentage of the people it may not work on, or it may have other effects?
So a good vaccine, the demands on a vaccine are the following. One, eliminate, in fact, the disease. Two, attenuate the severity of the disease. Three, decrease transmissibility so that an infected person doesn't infect the other person. The bar that has been required for passing the test, the threshold bar for the COVID, is 50% efficacy. So in other words, if you have 1,000 people who take the vaccine and 1,000 people who take placebo or don't take the vaccine, one would expect 50 people infected on the vaccine side and 100 on the unvaccinated side. So the efficacy is 50%. That takes you to the level of flu vaccine. The trouble with the 50% efficacy is, yes, it may reduce the severity of the disease, but it may still increase the transmissibility of the disease. So if you or I took the vaccine or other people took the vaccine and they feel somewhat liberated that they're immune to the consequences of the severity of the disease, but they still carry the infection and spread it around, it may paradoxically increase the spread. And that's a concern we have, that if we have a threshold of 50% efficacy in disease minimization and disease elimination, but the transmissibility may not be appropriately suppressed, and the people who feel liberated may actually unwittingly end up spreading the virus.
Boy, that is news to me. I had not heard that. Let me repeat this so make sure I have it right, Dr. Bomby. If, let's say, I get the vaccine and it works on me, I'm feeling good about myself because I've got the vaccine, but even if it works on me, I can still spread the vaccine? Is that what you're saying?
Even if, let's say, a person had the exposure to the virus, and the vaccine worked to eliminate the disease component, but the person becomes from a symptomatic case to an asymptomatic case, that doesn't mean that the person doesn't harbor the virus and can spread it around. So that's what the transmissibility component is. If you're using only 50% efficacy, you are condoning the other 50% to be welcome spreaders of the virus, more so because people will feel liberated that they are protected, but they may be protected, they may still be spreading to the vulnerable. So there are many intangibles that need to be addressed. So everybody, I want the vaccine yesterday, but the difference between a rushed treatment for a disease and a rushed preventative vaccine are totally world apart. Because when a person is sick, you throw the kitchen sink at him to salvage the person. But when a person is healthy to begin with, they're using a preventative tool that may end up hurting the person. The potential liability or the responsibility in that case is way more huge than when you're trying to put the fires out.
Oh, that's interesting. So if you have, let's go back to the original scenario. What happens when you develop an effective vaccine, but only 50% of the people take it, right? So you have 50% of the population that still could develop the virus because people who have been vaccinated, some of them may still be carriers, but yet half the population is inoculated, so to speak. Does the virus eventually die out over time with that many people vaccinated, or what happens?
the path of virus dissemination becomes more difficult with more people having the antibodies to it, because they won't be infected and they won't be spreading. Other than the caveat you said, if the vaccination is only 50% effective, then people can be asymptomatic carriers. But more people have been exposed to the vaccine or the virus, they become defensive component of the community, so they become part of the community immunity or the herd immunity. That decreases the spread. Also, it makes sure that the healthcare system is not stretched, and we have so many pharmacological means and understanding of the virus pathology that we are able to lessen the fatality of the virus. Not talking about the long haulers who are a continuous challenge, and that's something we're grappling to understand and how to treat. But at least the mortality of it can be impacted if we have incremental building of immunity based on vaccine and continued unavoidable spread of infection. The masks, Richard, the masks remain the common denominator. You can attenuate the dose of the inoculum or the virus, and the masks are poor man's vaccination already.
So do you agree with the head of the CDC, and I can't remember his name right now, who testified, and President Trump took issue with it, that right now the mask may be a better weapon against the virus than the vaccine may be?
We have always reiterated the message on the show for the last 6 months. The mask is not only an incredible weapon against minimization of the spread, but also is a poor man. That's called variolation. When you attenuate, I think we discussed this thing last week in meat packaging plants, where people are mandated to wear masks. The asymptomatic infection rate is 95%, and 5% have mild to moderate disease. So the evidence is there. The masks are the go-to tool in this war. Everything else will complement, and hopefully the vaccine will hit the home run. But the masks are go-to tool. No questions about that.
Oh, that's interesting. What do you tell people who, maybe even people in your profession, who are still doubting the mask, who say, there's just no scientific evidence? I had somebody on the other day, an eye doctor, who said that. What would you say to him? Yeah.
I think it's the difference of opinion that makes the horse races, as the saying goes. But not everybody wins the horse race, so you can't bet on a losing bet. I think that's a deliberate disregard of science. Just because you went to medical school doesn't mean that you have regard for science. The masks are one constant against many unanswered questions in this quest to defeat the virus. And the masks are also equally important to protect the lungs against the smoke and the embers that have filled our skies for the last 3 weeks.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You had said something earlier, and not today, but on another time we chatted about vaccine cross immunity. What do you mean by that? Yeah.
So that's an interesting question. So what happened, Richard, is going back to 1800s when Edward Jenner introduced the first scientific vaccination for the smallpox based on the cowpox. What they recognized was that the overall mortality decreased in people who had the vaccination overall, not related to smallpox, but overall there was a substantial decline in mortality in people who were vaccinated. And the same thing happened with polio, and same thing happened with measles vaccination. We don't have any understanding why, and same thing happened with BCG. So there is a protective effect of very effective vaccinations that increase the overall longevity and lower the mortality. And one of the paradoxes of eliminating diseases, and which we haven't really done the audit on, once we eliminate a smallpox vaccine, once we eliminate a disease, and the smallpox vaccine is not available for the rest of the world anymore, does it impact the overall mortality? Similarly with polio. Polio is almost non-existent other than some parts of Afghanistan and Pakistan. There's some pockets of residual polio. But the polio vaccine had an impact on the overall mortality reduction. If the polio disappears and polio vaccine isn't there, is the mortality going to be impacted in an unfavorable manner? But the cross immunity that we talked about earlier is related to BCG. BCG seems to lend protection against COVID. There is a trial going on in Australia in which the people are being injected with BCG vaccine. BCG is, by the way, attenuated tuberculosis-like pathogens that protect against tuberculosis, but they also seem to protect against COVID. So that's the cross immunity that we try to develop safety for one disease, but it seems to save you from another one also.
Interesting. Dr. Bomby, when you mentioned polio and that there's some emergence of cases of polio in Afghanistan, I believe you mentioned another country, do diseases ever go away? I mean, if with an effective vaccination program, is it possible to wipe COVID off, to get rid of it forever?
That's a good question. The answer is different strokes for different folks. So smallpox, yes. Polio, yes. COVID, no. The reason for that is even for measles, the immunity you build with smallpox and polio is lifelong. The immunity you build with coronaviruses, which is a COVID virus, is between a few months to maybe 2 years. So this is a recurrent vulnerability. This isn't one and done deal. So the COVID is with us for another 1,000 years because it becomes part of the cocktail of the cold and flu season viruses. This may even run the whole year gambit because the summer didn't seem to silence it much. But with increased immunity and available resources, basically will reduce its viciousness to very manageable degree.
That's so. Do you think being inoculated or vaccinated for COVID is going to become one on the checklist of, for example, if you're getting your child ready for school, you have to be vaccinated for different type of things? Is that going to join the list if you say if it only lasts a year, or are we going to be as a society be taking COVID booster shots the rest of our lives?
I think it's a safe assumption that it'll become like a flu shot every year.
Okay.
It's obviously a speculation on my part. You can't hurry time. The time will tell us. But it's a safe assumption. This isn't a lifelong immunity. This will require continuous boosting of the immunity.
Okay. All right. Excellent conversation. It's 2:25. We're out of time. Dr. Bomby, thank you again so much, sir. I sure appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
You too, Richard. Thank you. Good talking to you.
Okay. Thank you, sir. All right.